Well, y'all knew this was coming. There's no way I could review the first two movies and then just skip over possibly the most controversial Spider-Man movie ever made. Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, 10 years ago, once again directed by Sam Raimi, and once again brings back Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, and James Franco as Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson, and Harry Osborn. The movie has Peter Parker having possibly the best life anybody could have. He's top of his class at college, his girlfriend is finally the love of his life, Mary Jane Watson, he's doing fairly well at the Bugle, and he's managing to balance all that out while still being Spider-Man. So things are perfect, right? Well, his best friend now knows that he's Spider-Man, wants to get revenge on him for supposedly killing his father, and then things get blown out of proportions when an escaped convict is accused of being Uncle Ben's true killer. Peter Parker's having to deal with some jackass who also works at the Bugle, and he's also having to deal with this symbiote from outer space that's consumed his body to basically make him a completely different character and not the kind kid that he once was. Now, I'm going to get this out of the way right now. I don't hate Spider-Man 3. I don't even think it's that bad of a movie. I think it's a tad better than people give it credit for, but yeah, it's definitely the weakest of these first three movies. But before I really delve into this whole movie, let me take you back to 2007. The summer of 2007 was actually one of the most mediocre summers in terms of movies. It was a summer that was built up for so many movies, including Spider-Man 3, Pirates 3, Transformers, and the Simpsons movie. And a lot of the movies that have come out that were pretty much the big summer blockbusters, especially the third installments of a series, they looked great, had fun action scenes, had some good moments here and there, but the stories were a mess, and it was just a disappointing entry. And I mentioned a few of these movies beforehand, like Pirates and Transformers, but there was also movies like Shrek the Third and Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and of course, Spider-Man 3. Summer of 2007 was actually a fantastic year for comedies like Knocked Up, The Simpsons movie, and Superbad. But in terms of the big special effects extravaganzas, I feel like Fantastic Four and Transformers were the worst ones, and Spider-Man 3 is actually the best one. Okay, that's not entirely true because there was Ratatouille and Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which were fantastic, but I'm talking more within the realm of disappointing movies. Spider-Man 3 for me is the best of those disappointing summer blockbusters. I gotta say, I do love how the movie opens, like showing Peter Parker finally balancing out his full life with all the stuff in his personal life and being Spider-Man. It's really neat to see this character who's gone through so much shit and so much hardships through the past few movies finally get the ultimate life that we all pretty much want if we wanted to be Spider-Man, or hell, superhero in general. So you feel really good that Peter Parker is finally happy. And the first confrontation that he has with Harry Osborn as the new Goblin is actually pretty cool. It is overly reliant on CG and has a lot of really bad green screen effects that were bad even for 2007. But it was fun, it was fast-paced, it was well edited, and it features a lot of Sam Raimi's very unique camera work. And then things start to go downhill once Thomas Haden Church shows up as Flint Marko, aka the Sandman, and when Harry Osborn gets temporary amnesia. Ugh. The problems lie with this movie just having too much going on. Everything that the first two movies had was very minimal and kept everything self-contained. There weren't any plot points that just popped up out of nowhere. Everything was pretty much introduced within the first act of the movie. But then with Spider-Man 3, there are just so many things that pop up like as the movie goes on. For example, Sandman didn't need to be in this movie at all. I know Sam Raimi wanted to do Sandman, but I feel like Sandman is actually not that important of a character to this story. Yes, a lot of the action scenes involving the Sandman are really fantastic, especially the fight in the subways where he's fighting the black suit Spider-Man. That's amazing, but he serves no real purpose to the story. The only thing he really does serve a purpose for is for the Uncle Ben's killer moment to resurface surface in an attempt to tie in with the first movie, which that whole storyline wrapped up with the first movie. There was no reason to bring this plotline back in, and the movie literally pulls this plotline out of its ass near the beginning of the second act. And I do understand that this element is trying to tie in with the first movie to make everything one rounded trilogy, but I feel like the confrontations between Peter Parker and Harry Osborn did that job already. You didn't need to add in this other element. Also, speaking of the Peter Parker Harry Osborn relationship, temporary amnesia. It's stupid. It's stupid. I don't need to say much more than that. It's just downright stupid. Having Harry Osborn just kind of forget that Spider-Man killed his dad and that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, it's lazy. I do have an idea on how to fix this whole scenario, but I'll save that towards the end of the review after I give my rating. But the scenes involving Peter and Harry when they are fighting and their friendship is crumbling, it's actually really well done. Like the first confrontation once we see Harry Osborn as the new Goblin, and then the final battle when Harry and Peter have to mend their relationship, put their differences aside, and team up. Which that scene itself actually follows probably the most laughable scene in the movie. It's supposed to be played for drama. It's the part when the butler comes in and tells Harry that, oh, by the way, when I cleaned up the blood, I realized that his blood was on the glider, so he just kind of killed himself. It's supposed to give Harry this realization that he was wrong the whole time and that Peter Parker was not the one who killed his dad. But it just doesn't work, and everyone's made fun of this, and everyone's pointed it out. But you expect Harry Osborn to go, motherfucker, you mean after 2 years I've been pissed off at my best friend for thinking that he killed my dad? And you knew this whole time? Why didn't you tell me in the first place? I lost my best friend. My face is burnt off. Why the fuck didn't you tell me that in the first place? You're fired. Get out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Go be a butler for Tony Stark or something. Oh wait, he doesn't exist in this universe. So yeah, it's downright stupid. And I say 2 years because even though this movie is made 5 years after the first Spider-Man, all these movies supposedly take place in a 2-year gap. Now let's talk about Mary Jane Watson, because with the past 2 movies, I've kind of defended her saying, well, I don't really get the hate because she has a nice personality, she's kind, and I do like the chemistry that she has with Peter Parker, and Kirsten Dunst still does a good job. This is the first movie where I start to understand why people think she's a shitty girlfriend, because there's a scene when she's getting bad reviews. Okay, she sees one bad review for her play, and Peter Parker is trying to help her out, saying like, look, that's just the critics. I've gotten a lot of bad press as being Spider-Man from mainly the Daily Bugle, but time went on, I improved, I ended up winning a whole bunch of people over, but MJ just kind of ignores what Peter's saying and says, right now I need you to understand how I'm feeling. I just told you! I've gotten bad reviews from the entire city of New York, and Spider-Man is pretty much me putting on a play in a different kind of light. So I know how you're feeling. I understand how you're feeling. Just keep going at it, don't get discouraged, and people will end up loving you. Jesus Christ! And that scene where MJ is trying to tell Peter to understand what he's going through, that also brings into fact that this series as a whole has a lot of bad dialogue. I mentioned the bad dialogue in Spider-Man 1. There's a handful of bad dialogue in 2, but in Spider-Man 3, you know what? No, 1 is the worst. 1 has the worst dialogue, but 3 has bad lines like, hey kid, you want a job? Why would I want a job? I'm just a kid. What kid actually says something like that? And the whole thing of, I need you to understand how I'm feeling right now. Rewind a few seconds where I rant on that. But the dialogue, I'm just not a big fan of it. But it'll never be as bad as a line like, teeth. We need more teeth. Which that is probably one of the absolute worst lines of dialogue I've ever heard in a big budget movie. And speaking of Jurassic World, Bryce Dallas Howard is in this movie. Miss former franchise killer herself is in this movie as Gwen Stacy. Now if you just started recently following me, one thing that I said in my reviews for Jurassic World and Terminator Salvation was that Bryce Dallas Howard has always come across as a franchise killer. Like whenever she's in a movie, a big budget special effects movie, you think, crap, this is going to be the franchise killer. This is the one where after this, they're going to have to reboot it. Obviously, with Jurassic World, that's not the case because we got Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom coming out, which is a stupid title. But with Terminator Salvation, she was in it. That movie didn't do so well critically and even financially. And then they rebooted it with Terminator Genesis, or whatever the hell you want to call that. Reboot, sequel, I don't know. And then with this movie, she pops up as Gwen Stacy, and the next movie to follow was a reboot, The Amazing Spider-Man. And I don't hate Bryce Dallas Howard, not at all. I think she's incredibly talented. It's just she doesn't pick a lot of roles that really emphasize how talented she actually is. And with Spider-Man 3, she's good as Gwen Stacy, but she also feels very useless. They try to once again recreate the iconic scene where Gwen Stacy dies from the comics, but it doesn't work this time because they already did a scene similar to that in the first Spider-Man movie, and we've never seen any dynamic between her and Peter Parker to begin with, so there's no real chemistry. Now let's kind of roll back into Peter Parker and talk about Emo Peter. Oh man, okay, let me just gather my thoughts, because this is one aspect in Spider-Man 3 that a lot of people say killed it for them. When the symbiote gets attached to Peter Parker and it starts taking over his whole life, he starts being a little more egotistical. He starts being more of a dickhead, more of an asshole. And there's one scene in particular where it's played to James Brown, where he's dancing in the street in all black. And I don't hate it. That's a big point of people hating it, but it's an interesting parallel with the raindrops keep falling on my head scene from Spider-Man 2, where that scene was really creative and pretty much showed a montage of Peter Parker giving up his life as Spider-Man and things getting back on track. This scene is a great parallel because it's very tongue-in-cheek, it's goofy, but it's almost intentionally goofy because the symbiote has fully taken control over him and he's really living the life. He's taking more chances, he's more outgoing, not in a positive way though, because he's trying to impress a bunch of girls on the street and they're just like, ugh, what a dork, get away from me. But I don't think it's worthy to be shit on as much as the jazz club dance scene that comes afterwards, which, I mean, look, there's a dead horse, let's beat it. Everyone's talked about that dance scene, so we'll just move on. It sucks. That's all I'll say. It sucks. But if I did have a problem with the scene where he's dancing in all black on the streets, it's that's probably not the best way to portray Peter Parker with the symbiote attached to him. Because what I remember with the black suit, and my memory comes mainly from the 90s cartoon, is that Peter Parker was a straight up asshole. His attitude completely changed, where he was a complete shithead to everyone around him, people who didn't really deserve it. But in this movie, he's just a little more egotistical. He doesn't really do anything that's straight up evil. The most evil thing that he does is hit Mary Jane. I mean, as wrong as it is to hit your ex-spouse, I feel like that he didn't do enough to really portray him as evil. There could have been another way to portray his attitude with the symbiote. Now let's talk about Topher Grace as Eddie Brock and Venom as a whole. I'll just say that Venom is rushed. I won't say he feels forced in because they did build up the symbiote. And to be honest, even though Sony really wanted to do Venom, Venom feels more organic to the plot than the Sandman ever did. Because they build up the symbiote. They show the symbiote. They build up the symbiote attaching himself to Spider-Man. So if reworked, the Venom plotline could have easily been a better idea than bringing in the Sandman and accusing him of being Uncle Ben's killer. And I don't have too much of a problem with Topher Grace in it, because he very much is slimy and a piece of shit, which I think was intentional. So you could hate Venom a little more, but they don't really spend that much time with him. He doesn't really appear as Venom until an hour and 45 minutes into the movie, and even then, most of the time we see him as Venom, his face is peeled back, and we don't get to see the cool, monstrous Venom face that we all want to see. And I also had a problem with Venom being referred to as I or me, because in the comics and the 90s cartoon, Venom always referred to himself as we as in the symbiote and Eddie Brock. Like if you take another villain, Carnage, Carnage is just that insane to where he can go about calling himself I or me. Not so much the case with Venom, so I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't take that opportunity. And yeah, I just feel like Venom could have been done a whole lot better. It was good to see him at all, and I know they're doing another Venom movie starring Tom Hardy, but unless it's actually part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I don't have the highest hopes for it. Because Sony just has no idea what to do with the Spider-Man series without some guidance. And Spider-Man 3 was very much the movie where Sony really started to interfere. This was the movie where they went, oh, well, we got a huge giant moneymaker. We got to milk this for everything that's worth, even if it means interfering with the filmmakers and just taking over production, not letting them do what they fully want to do. So I've went through my notes, and I've covered all the stuff that I wanted to talk about that I didn't like about Spider-Man 3. Let's talk about all the good stuff, all the things that make me like this movie more than others. And when I say like, I mean more in the realm of it's okay, it's not terrible or downright bad. The action scenes are phenomenal. The train scene in Spider-Man 2 will still be the best action scene of the entire series, but the action scenes here are really great as well. I mentioned the opening fight between Harry Osborn and Peter Parker, but all the fights with Sandman are actually really cool. There's a great shot where Spider-Man sweeps his legs and he just kind of falls to the ground. And there's another scene during the subway fight when Spider-Man grabs a hold of Sandman, pushes his face up against a moving subway train, and his face just kind of diminishes because the sand is peeling off. And again, there's a lot of really great camera work in this movie. Even though it's reliant on CG and a lot of the CG effects are pretty not terrible, but not good, it's still impressive and fun to watch. I also really like the final battle, like I've said before. It's action-packed, it's fast-paced, there's really not many points of slow motion, and before you talk about the Sandman monster, the only reason he's moving in slow motion is to give you a feeling of how large he is, how big he is. Which, speaking of the Sandman monster, I gotta ask this question. Am I the only one that hears the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man whenever the Sandman monster roars? Because I remember in the trailer for Spider-Man 3, they used Zilla's roar for the Sandman, but in the movie, it sounds like they used the roar for Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in Ghostbusters. Go ahead and watch some of the scenes with the Sandman monster, and then watch the Stay Puft scene in Ghostbusters and tell me the roars aren't identical. I also do like the very end, after all is said and done, where Peter and Harry have mended their relationship just as Harry Osborn dies. Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson are back together, living their life. A little sadder than usual, but things are kind of good. It just leaves me with a good feeling. It sounds like the negatives outweigh the positives greatly with this movie. I don't think it's that bad because it still has really good performances from your actors, except the guy who plays the butler. Even if it has too much in the movie, it did make an attempt to tie everything together and bring it around full circle with the other movies. Unlike The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which just had too much and never resolved it. I would say that it is a disappointing movie, but it has so many good things in it that I'll say watch at your own risk. It's been 10 years since this movie came out, so if you still hate Spider-Man 3, then whatever good I have to say is not going to change your mind at all. But if you've never seen Spider-Man 3, or if you haven't seen Spider-Man 3 in a while and want to give it another visit, I definitely recommend it, because it's nowhere near one of the worst superhero movies ever made. It's no Superman 4, it's no Batman and Robin, it's no X-Men Origins Wolverine, it's no Elektra, it's no Batman versus Superman. It's not that bad, but it is definitely a major step down from the first two movies. Oh, by the way, before people start asking me, yes, I am aware of the editor's cut of Spider-Man 3, which I actually wanted to try to hunt down and rent before doing this review, just so I could compare the two cuts. But as far as I could tell from doing research and reading other reviews, there's not that much of a difference. It's only 2 minutes shorter than the theatrical cut. There are no deleted scenes added into the movie, nor are there scenes taken out of the movie, unfortunately. The main changes come from cut dialogue, shots that are trimmed to be shorter, nothing significant, so it makes me question what the actual point of this editor's cut is. So, no, I haven't seen the editor's cut, nor do I plan to see the editor's cut or even revisit Spider-Man 3 altogether. Now, I gave my rating. Here are some of the suggestions that I would recommend in order to fix Spider-Man 3. When Chris Stuckman reviewed Spider-Man 3 last year, he went in detail on how to fix Spider-Man 3. What I'm going to say is not in full detail, but just elements that would help fix Spider-Man 3. For one, cut out temporary amnesia. Make Harry Osborn kind of taunt Peter Parker throughout a lot of the movie before they have a big confrontation. As Norman Osborn said, strike the heart. Try to tear Peter Parker apart from the inside, in the words of Ultron. Try to take away Mary Jane Watson, torment him inside, but not physically hurt him until later on in the movie. Also, cut out Sandman and his association with the death of Uncle Ben. That's a plot point that just comes the fuck out of nowhere and didn't really need to be in it. Sandman himself really had no purpose to be in this movie. Also, make Peter a little more evil and more egotistical while he's wearing the black suit. Also, if you cut out Sandman and temporary amnesia, that gives more time to develop Eddie Brock to make him a little more fleshed out. And that way we know him a little more once the symbiote takes control of him and becomes Venom. And also, don't peel back his face. Nobody wants to see Venom with his face peeled back at all. Everyone wants to see the monster. So those are pretty much my suggestions for fixing Spider-Man 3, and that pretty much does it for my review of this movie and the entire Sam Raimi trilogy. So there originally was going to be a Spider-Man 4. Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire, and Kirsten Dunst were going to come back. It was supposed to have John Malkovich as the Vulture and Anne Hathaway as Black Cat, which is ironic considering that Anne Hathaway would eventually go on to be Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises. But once again, Sony interfered, and it just got to the point where Sony and Sam Raimi couldn't agree on anything, so it got scrapped, and Sony decided to make The Amazing Spider-Man, which in my very first review, I loved. But when I reviewed it again in prep for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I just kind of liked it, but thinking back on it now, it's not good. I mean, it's not terrible, but it just goes down that road of been there, done that. I don't think the Lizard was that good of a villain, nor did he look that good. He just looked like Killer Croc more than the actual Lizard from the comics. And if you hated the Emo Peter phase in this movie, Emo Peter is the entire character of Peter Parker in the Amazing Spider-Man series. Like, there's nothing about Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker that makes me feel like he's the kind kid. He just comes across as a straight-up asshole. Not evil, but just an all-around dick. But The Amazing Spider-Man is still better than The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is the Spider-Man movie that I hate. That movie just had the exact same problems that Spider-Man 3 had, where it just had too much going on, except Spider-Man 3 made a point to tie everything together and come full circle to the first two movies, where Amazing Spider-Man 2 tried too much to try to set up spin-offs and sequels, to the point where nothing is left resolved. It leaves the door open for a sequel that, thank God, never happened, because The Amazing Spider-Man 2 flopped, and that led Sony to make a deal with Marvel Studios to bring Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We got to see Tom Holland for the first time in Captain America Civil War, which, for as little as he is in it, he is my favorite Spider-Man. It just seems like all the good elements of both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield have melded into the MCU Spider-Man, and the way he plays it is pretty much Spider-Man that I remember. So yeah, I think Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. I'm dying to see what happens with Spider-Man Homecoming. And yeah, I mean, on the whole, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, I like. It may have a weak conclusion, but the first two movies are great. So if you haven't seen the Spider-Man trilogy, definitely go check it out. And until then, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie, if and when you've seen it. I'm going to be taking a break from retro reviews for a while. I'll be back at the end of August for another set of retro reviews, but until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one.